how much should you homebrew Dungeons & Dragons? The things I will easily recommend homebrewing are spells and magic items. Aside from artifact items, these tend to be very simple, they only do one thing, and adjusting the balance is pretty easy. You can always change an item's rarity or a spell's level. That is, unless your homebrew is too powerful for a legendary item or a 9th level spell. Just one step above that is homebrewing feats. Again, very simple, it is just one ability, but the balance matters more. A feat needs to be appropriate for a level 4 character. Homebrewing monsters is still a fine idea, but it's quite a bit more work. You need to figure out what stats the monster should have and what actions it can take, and if you're trying to make a legendary boss monster, it can have quite a few different actions. Although the balance on these is very easy, you can always change the monster's challenge rating, or just don't even bother because D&D 5th edition monsters are not that well balanced anyway. Making your own subclass is still recommendable, although quite a bit more advanced. You need to come up with 4 or 5 different abilities that all fit a cohesive theme, and the abilities have to be at appropriate amounts of power for the levels when the players get them. Additionally, different classes have different power budgets for their subclasses. Some classes, like druids and artificers, have their playstyle largely defined by their subclass, while others, like wizards and rogues, just don't. Where homebrewing starts to get a bit iffy is trying to make your own class. Firstly, this is a lot of work, especially if you're following the D&D 5th edition template and having at least 2 or 3 subclasses for your class. But there's also the question of if making your own class is even necessary. D&D 5e mostly realizes new fantasy archetypes through subclasses, so if you had an idea for, say, a warrior that infuses their weapons with elemental energy, ask yourself if it really needs to be its own class or if it could just be a fighter or barbarian subclass. However, the one thing you definitely should not homebrew is a conversion kit to turn Dungeons & Dragons into something besides high fantasy. If you're trying to rewrite Dungeons & Dragons to replace the magic with sci-fi technology, don't do that, because that is well beyond the scope of amateur homebrewing. At that point, you're not altering Dungeons & Dragons anymore, you're taking the D20 system and writing your own tabletop RPG. So unless you're thinking about publishing this new game you're making, I cannot recommend trying to do this.